Organic and totalitarian states. The Italian traditionalist Julius Evola was not a man who avoided controversies. One rather gets the impression that he was more than happy to provoke the citizens, regardless of whether they call themselves communists, liberals, or fascists. It is therefore significant when Evola deliberately chose to avoid a term that could have provoked a large amount of citizens. The concept Evola distanced himself from was totalitarianism. We shall today review why he saw it as a big threat to the tradition, that he consciously avoided to pick anti-bourgeoisie points by calling his position totalitarian. The person who has access to his book, Men Among the Ruins, will note that today's post is a personally colored summary of Chapter 4. The Organic State. Evola bases scripture on the tradition. The tradition is a set of eternal values. They are not human in the sense that they were not invented by people but mediated by gods and prophets. A political organization for Evola is only a real state when it realizes these eternal ideals. One can therefore assume that Evola's ideal is the dictatorship, where a group of brutal bureaucrats are forcing all subjects to obey the ideals of the tradition, since not all people are of the same quality, some being more animalistic and primitive, and thus need guidance in battling themselves and their vices. But that is not the case. The traditional ideal is instead the organic state. Quote, "A state is organic when it has a center, and this center is an idea that shapes the various domains of life in an efficacious way. It is organic when it ignores the division and the autonomization of the particular, and when by virtue of a system of hierarchical participation, every part within its relative autonomy performs its own function and enjoys an intimate connection with the whole. In an organic state we can speak of a whole, namely something integral and spiritually unitary that articulates and unfolds itself rather than a sum of elements within an aggregate characterized by a disorderly clash of interests." End quote. In other words, an organic state has a core, which is an idea. In the Holy German Roman Empire, this idea was the idea of the Christian Empire. The idea pervades the whole state. All its components realize it in their own way. The craftsman realizes it in an art that strives to express the divine. The warrior realizes it on the one hand in his own person, and on the other hand also in the defense against its enemies, and so on. All these people live their own lives, doing their own things, but they all strive towards the same shared goal, living under the same idea, and in this way, synergy gets created. A vital organic state need not be particularly centralized, and the fact is that the Holy German Roman Empire would feel just as much like home for an anarchist or neoliberal as for a fascist or a Blut und Volk, blood and soil, National Socialist. It was filled of small principalities, peasant republics, free cities, bishoprics, free monasteries, order of knights or knight orders, and so on, in a mosaic that may well have inspired the early anarchism. All of them acknowledged the emperor as the link to the non-human origin idea, but they had a high degree of autonomy. The totalitarian state. Totalitarianism is to evolve, however, a falsification of the organic ideal. It is a system where the unit is forced through coercion rather than by a spiritual, genuine authority. It is based on a political foundation rather than a spiritual one. Totalitarianism often also strives for a depersonification and is hostile to the autonomy of the parts, regardless of whether these parts are geographical, ethnic, or professional as in occupation. It is a kind of sclerosis, and one oftentimes also ends up with a large bureaucracy that controls everything. It often emerges as a reaction against individualism and the like, but it unfortunately also kills everything that was still alive and traditional in the process. My own thoughts. Exactly how the distinction between organic and totalitarian state can be applied in our time is of course an individual question. Some might view it as an organic state if Syrians or Sami, who are loyal to Sweden, are allowed cultural autonomy, while another might state that it is by the unions developing into autonomous guilds that one achieves this. A third person might advocate quitting municipal socialism or Dares blood and soil ideal, which, on a side note, is closer to my own personal favorites. That the current system is totalitarian, and that the therapeutic kindergarten state uses coercion and brainwashing rather than any authority should in any case be obvious. The idea that there is a people's will in democracy is an illusion that gets shattered quite easy from investigating the line of work called market advertisement and how they operate, all the way to simply digging deeper into the political and psychological history, where we will find interesting names such as Edouard Bernays, Zelensky, and Marcuse, among hundreds of other key players who've all influenced the citizens more or less, en masse, without the citizens' awareness. The current system is dependent on a large bureaucracy, and it will not tolerate autonomy for the several parts that comprise the society. Since the parts' autonomy inevitably would lead to a backlash against the therapeutic state's unrealistic ideas regarding everything from child rearing to feminism. It is also obvious that there are clear similarities with the French New Right. The difference, I suppose, is that one, they aren't very interested in the possible non-human origins of our European bioculture, but the same attitude that the whole best gets developed and implemented by small autonomous communities one will find with Grèce and de Benoit. The similarities with national syndicalism are also evident. This is not surprising since national syndicalism had its roots in the Iberian integralism, which is part of the Southern European tradition, and in the Catholic social philosophy, the organic state, with its far-reaching freedom for the family, community, region, and the syndicate, always has occupied a central role. How one best is to realize the organic ideal will be individual. Some of us will claim that it is not fully politically possible today, and that an authoritarian state still is going to be necessary to combat the pure subversion. But hopefully it can still inspire and arouse a discussion of how the good society should look like.